and do everything you do in love. Hey, good morning. Good morning. Superheroes, you can grab a seat. I'm going to eat this peanut butter here in just a second, but before I do, I want to tell you there is a time. Feel free to listen. Feel free to listen. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Now, there's a time in every superhero's life where they kind of lose their way. They get discouraged. They kind of quit on themselves. They kind of forget where their power comes from. It happened to me just this last week. My son Skylar broke his leg, and I was spending the night in the hospital. I just came to the end of it. I was tired and frustrated and angry, and I just kind of forgot where our power comes from as people who belong to Jesus. Well, it happens to every superhero. Well,
good job.
Let me show you. Let me show you somebody it happened to earlier. Spider-Man. Check it out.
This is my guy, Spider-Man.
Oh, Beth. I'm just Peter Parker. I'm Spider-Man. No more. No more.
As if throwing away something on the outside could change what's on the inside. It can't. Something on the outside of you doesn't determine what's on the inside of you. And in that clip, Spider-Man had kind of given up on who he was and where his power came from, to the point where I'm Spider-Man no more. Now, I'm going to tell you a story today. It's one of my favorite stories in the Bible, but you need to listen to it carefully. Because if you just listen to it from the top, you don't listen really close, you'll think it's a story that tells you just to try harder. Just try harder. Be stronger. And some of us have tried pretty hard and have been as strong as we think we can. And this is not just a story to try harder. It's a story to remind you of the power that you have through Christ. That there's a deeper story in this story than just come on, do better, try harder. Because I think most of you, gosh, parents, campers, I think most of you try pretty hard. Just sometimes in the middle of that trying, you just get discouraged. And you forget where your power might come from. And you forget your superpower, and you forget, well, you lose hope. So this is a story, but I want you to listen to it 2 levels. The level of that you're called to do something absolutely courageous with your life and to trust God with that. But then we're going to talk about it from a little bit different angle. We're going to talk about the fact that it's teaching us something more than just try harder. Because I look in your all's eyes, and some of you parents, some of the campers, look in your eyes and you're tired and you wonder, oh, and this is a story for you. Now, it's a story you've heard of a million times. It's the story of the fiery furnace. Now, it takes place in the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel's an interesting book. Here's what happened, and it's important to know the backstory, because every good superhero story has a backstory. You know, you got to understand the backstory to understand what takes place. Make sense? Just, you know something, I liked what you were doing when the Super Twins were up here? That this group would go, ooh, and this side would go, ah. So let's just do that sometimes. If I say something and I think it's important, I'm going to go, then I'm going to raise my hand, and at that point, you guys go, ooh. Ooh. And then you guys go, ah. Let's just try that real quick. Hey, if you listen real close to this, it'll give you something more than just try harder. I think you can even do better than that. This is one more time, and I mean with all the gumption coruscating from the very core of your being. Here we go. All right, ready? Okay, now here's what we're gonna do one more time. I want your ooh to start out really loud, like ooh, and then fade. And then I want your ah to start out really loud, like ah, and then as it fading out. Okay, ready? Here we go. You are superstars. That's amazing. So, what happens in this book is all of God's people were living in Jerusalem, and they were having a fine time. They were having a great time. Everything was going well. It was the best of times, and things were cooking, and they were just as happy as they could be, happy as little clams and lamb and whatever it is, and whatever that means. I don't even know what I just said. I'm not even sure what I just mumbled.
Mom,
But they were happy people.
you make me frustrated.
That was really poor. That was really poor. And everything was going well in their world, and they were really happy people. Goodness gracious, I now know my superpower. Okay, but as it always does, easy never lasts forever. And there were people that tried to take them over, and the Chaldeans, you don't need to know much about them other than the fact that they won. And they took back a lot of the people that were in Jerusalem back with them and made them slaves. There were 4 people that were really, really smart, and the king, Nebuchadnezzar, I'll tell you what, you do the oohs and the ahs. Let's have one thing for when like a villain comes in. Let's go, what's a villain noise? Oh, that's it. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so, and then there was a king of the Chaldeans who took these people back as slaves. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, that's good. Let's try it one time. Dun, dun, dun. You guys are absolutely amazing. I just want to keep standing up here and make you make noises. All right. So Nebuchadnezzar takes these people back, and there were 4 of them that were really, really bright. And what they used to do with slaves back then, if they were a doctor or if they were a philosopher or something like that, they would bring them in and use them. I mean, they would have them work in their palaces. And there were 4 guys. One was named Daniel, and then there were 3 other guys. Anybody know their names? Oh. You're right. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now here's what I do. Whenever I say Abednego, I want everybody to go, 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 go. Okay, you get with me? So there was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You guys make this so enjoyable. So
way to go, Dad.
Thanks, son. So Abednego. Go. Forget the talk. Let's just do that all day. Okay. So these 4 people believed in God in a very pagan land. And there were, if you read the book of Daniel, you'll see that there were lots of tests. At first, it was with Daniel. And he would, excuse me, it's the microphone. And there were all these people. At first, it was just Daniel versus Nebuchadnezzar. Dun, 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 dun. You guys, you're starting to forget your parts. I'm just saying, maybe this has become too complicated. You're forgetting your parts. Let's just remember now. There's ooh and ah. There's Nebuchadnezzar. Dun, 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 dun. And then there's Abednego.
Go.
Guys, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. So Daniel, at first in the book of Daniel, there's all these tests with him knowing how to kind of read dreams and that sort of stuff. There's kind of a contest between the true God and false gods. And as you would bet, even though they were in a foreign land and even though they were oppressed slaves, the true God won and false gods didn't. And then Nebuchadnezzar, are you guys listening with me? And then Nebuchadnezzar He kind of got a little bit full of himself. Have you noticed that there's one of the problems with people that God has a problem with are people who get a little bit too full of themselves. They think they're a little bigger and more important than they are because God doesn't see importance the way the world does. And so anyway, Nebuchadnezzar, he decided to build a big statue of himself. And so he built a statue that was 90 feet tall of himself. What do you think about that? He was a little bit, he was so in love with himself, he was a married couple by himself. He had smudge marks all over his mirror from kissing himself. But that's another point. Hey, by the way, did you hear what happened when Batman and Robin got run over by a steamroller? They became Flatman and Ribbon. All right. So Nebuchadnezzar makes a huge statue of himself. And it's a big old statue of himself. And he says, I'm going to make everybody bow down to my statue. And when the music starts, bow down. And so they were just out there, and all of a sudden the music started. It was supposed to be a time to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar. And you know what? Oh, thank you. Somebody was actually still following the rules. I appreciate that. So when the music started, and Nebuchadnezzar looked around, and he was expecting everybody to bow, except our people who believed in God, the true God. They did not bow, and that would be.
Yes, that's a good thing.
That would be our heroes of this story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they didn't bow down. Well, the Nebuchadnezzar, he was furious. And he said, you better bow down to me. And they didn't. So he said, I'm going to throw them in the furnace. And so he was so mad, he jacked up the furnace to 7 times hotter than it usually was. I mean, they kept putting stuff. It was so hot that it killed the guard on the outside of it. I mean, it was just hotter than a jalapeno's armpit. It was just hot. And so they went inside. So he said, you either bow down to me or you're going in the furnace. And they said, we follow the true God. And he said, okay, buckos, and he throws them in the furnace. And then something amazing happened. Now, God doesn't always do this. There's a story later on in the Bible of Stephen, who also stood up against authority, and he got stoned because of his standing. But in this case, what God did is God let the fire not burn them. And they stood in there, and the fire was just stoking hot. And they just stood there. And Nebuchadnezzar, he looked in and he said, they're not burning. And then he noticed, he saw a 4th figure in there. He only threw 3 in, and he kept looking and wondering, and eventually they came out. Now, the 4th figure didn't come out, because that was one of God's angels, or it was probably Jesus standing there with him. Because when even Stephen, the story I told you about that where God did not deliver, Stephen looked up and he saw Jesus. Jesus was present. You can't measure life always by circumstances. But anyway, back to the story of Nebuchadnezzar and Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. So what happens in this story is he pulls them out, and when he pulls them out, they didn't even smell like smoke. I mean, it's like it didn't even faze them. Now, one level of understanding that story would be to encourage you to stand up for what's right, to trust God with your life, and to speak up for Him and stand up for that's right. And that's a really good point of that story. And I want you to remember that. Because at all times you get a chance to stand for what is right or to stand for what is wrong. And it's not really a neutral place in life. And so that's one point of the story. And I want to tell you, there's a more important point of the story. And that's this. All of these people that were with the Chaldeans didn't like the situation they were in. The Bible would say they were exiles, they were strangers, which means they were in a place they didn't want to be in. It wasn't home for them. It wasn't what they wanted. They belonged back in Jerusalem, and that's not where they were. They were in exile. You realize that a lot of the Bible is teaching people who feel like they don't belong that God hasn't forgotten them. Do you realize that one of the major themes in the Bible is the idea of exile? That we are strangers in the land that we are placed in. Do you understand that the Bible, all through the Old Testament, there's this theme, and even in the New Testament, there's this idea that you will be in a situation that doesn't feel right to you. It's not what I want. It's not what I asked for. It's not the story that I would have written for my life. None of those guys, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, none of them would have said, hey, you know what I'd like? I'd like my country to be messed up, and I'd like to go live down here and get thrown in a fire by some narcissist. I mean, none of them would have written that story. They were given that story by God, but that's not the story they wanted. They were in exile. And there's two things I want you to know, and I want you to never forget it. So listen to me. I want you to never forget this. Even when you're in exile, God is still sovereign. Meaning, fancy word for even when you're in places that don't feel right. Even when you're in places that you think this isn't what it should be. Even when you're in places where you go, I don't like this. The God of the universe is sovereign and hasn't forgotten you. You remember that. When they were taken out of Jerusalem, they were taken from their home, and they said, this isn't what we wanted. This isn't the life we chose. We wanted to be back home. Why are we down here with Nebuchadnezzar? But one of the lessons of Daniel, one of the lessons of the fiery furnace, is no matter where you are in exile, no matter what story is being told with your life, no matter what you don't like in your circumstances, no matter what's going on around you, the God of the universe hasn't forgotten you, and He's still sovereign. He's still in charge. He's still capable of running the deal. Do you understand that? God is, again, I know it's a fancy word we don't use much. God is sovereign. Just feel like God is the giver of superpower, and He is the superpower. That's what it means for sovereign. Second lesson that you need to learn from Daniel and the fiery furnace is it is possible to thrive. It is possible to be strong. It is possible to stand firm, even in the midst of trial. That's the story of Daniel. It's the story of our heroes in the furnace. That no matter how it feels to you, no matter what the circumstances are, a sovereign God has not forgotten you and is still in charge. The second thing you've got to remember from this story, you've got to remember this from this story, is that even in the most difficult of circumstances, because God is sovereign and He gives you the power when He lives in you, you can flourish even in difficult times. As a matter of fact, you'll actually flourish more in difficult times. Now, I wanted you to know that great story of the fiery furnace isn't a story to tell you, try harder, keep going. Because most of you are tired and you've been trying pretty hard. It's really a story to tell you that God hasn't forgotten you. Not one of you. God hasn't forgotten your name, who you are, what difficulties you have. God has not forgotten you and your situation and how hard it sometimes is. God hasn't forgotten you, and He is still in charge in spite of what it might feel like. Never forget that. And never forget. Never forget. Even in exile, even as slaves or prisoners, like in the Bible some people were, it's possible to thrive and to grow and live your life in a way that brings glory to God and joy to your soul. That's the truth. Now, today, we're going to have lots of fun. And as you're having fun, remember, it is the Sabbath. Today is Sunday. And on the Sabbath, we're supposed to do something to make the day sacred. And really, it's God who makes things sacred, not people. But you know, by you loving each other, by you believing and realizing that God, the power, your superpower comes from God, you're making today sacred. And therefore, this is a holy day. So you're going to have a wonderful day. Don't ever forget where your power comes from. Your power comes from God in you. Circumstances, God's still sovereign. Circumstances, it's possible to flourish even when times are difficult. You remember that. Let me pray for us in our day. And then we'll get started on a great Sabbath day together. We will Sabbath and celebrate and worship God together. Bless you. Let's pray together. Father,